Welcome back, baseball fans. 1973-76 offseason look, part 4. And we have completed the offseason movement of players into waivers, keepers, and retirements. This is the 4th installment. We did the first 24 teams. We got through the final 8 and then got the accounting up for all the teams. And if you're looking in the right column here, you see we all are at 4020202. So let's take you to what happened, beginning with the next team. It was the Mets who initiated the next talk, and it was about seeing what they could get for Bobby Darwin. We knew the Twins were interested, so the Twins had to make room. So let's check out a deal that went down. The next deal. The Twins sent keeper Pete Reichert to the Padres for a retiring player because the Padres didn't have a lefty reliever with Schellenbach leaving, which sets the Padres up with 3 nice lefties: Pete Reichert, Randy Jones, and Brent Strom. Also, San Diego had to then move Bob Johnson onto waivers to make room for Reichert. So that gives Minnesota a spot to make a deal. And they made the deal. They sent the retiring player to the Mets for Bobby Darwin. So the Twins got a token for Pete Reichert in the San Diego deal, and then they gave that token to the Mets to get Bobby Darwin. So this is a correction, if you want to call it. Bobby Darwin escaped the Minnesota system, and they got him back. Good for them. They needed to get one of their outfielders back. Their outfield was looking old. And let's look at Minnesota for a second here. We know where the Mets are on the clock, but let's look at Minnesota here and see that in the outfield now, they still have Larry Heisel and Jim Holt, who's not going to be around for much longer. But Bobby Darwin's going to have 25 home runs next couple years, and that'll hold down the fort in right field until guys like Dan Ford arrive, Bomba Rivera, and so forth. So that's good. They needed to get Bobby Darwin. He will join the 3 pitchers, Blyleven, Cott, and Goltz. And remember, they already signed Bill Singer to the roster, their active roster, so they're in good shape, are the Twins. And the Mets' other move is this is what's going to happen. They would end up putting Duffy Dyer on waivers. Speaking of this process, let's continue. The Cubs were next, and guess what? Well, Glenn Beckert and Jim Hickman, nobody wanted them. So the Cubs couldn't make a deal, and they had to put them on waivers. They're at the end of the rope. They have a handshake deal, we like to say. You can come on back if we can't find anybody better. So check your messages on your machine if they need to bring back Beckert or Hickman. What hurts Beckert is he doesn't play third or short as a utility infielder. If he could do that, he might get a job. But Hickman is a declining defensive outfielder who only has 3 home runs left in his career. So that's not good either. So they probably should retire to greener pastures, these 2 players. Next up, the White Sox, they had one more asset left, and that was Tom Bradley. They decided of all the players they were going to move on from, they moved on Aparicio to get younger at shortstop, and they realized that Tom Bradley only has 1 good year left, and it's not even with the White Sox, it's with the Giants. They sent him to Seattle for a waived player. They get a token for that. Seattle, remember, had Dick Woodson and Jerry Bell competing for a roster spot. Well, Tom Bradley has that spot now, and both Woodson and Jerry Bell are now on waivers to get the team's math in pretty good shape. Let's go look at, well, all the math is 40202. But the next choice here, I think we're on the White Sox. Yeah, it was... In a difficult move, the White Sox had to put Stan Bonson on waivers, and the problem was his good year coming up is in 76, 4 years into the future, and it's only as a long reliever with a 1.115 whip, but not as a starter anymore. In the next 2 years starting, Well, he can start and eat up innings, but he also pitches rather mediocre, below average. And so they put him on waivers. That meant that it was Carlos May. Let's look at the White Sox. For the longest time, it looked like it was Carlos May was on the way out because he only has, well, he's got a couple good years left. But I guess Dick Allen spoke up in the owners' meeting and said, well, I got to have my buddy Carlos May back. And so he got his teammate back at least one more year. We'll see how it goes. Carlos May's career starts to dwindle. Mixed results here and there. Joining Wilbur Wood and Terry Forster. Next move, and now we're going to see teams realizing there's nothing to trade. There's nobody wanting to make a deal anymore. Willie Mays goes on waivers, and actually you could say he's traded to me. So Willie Mays is on my team. I'm team 33. That means I can put Willie Mays wherever I want to put him, if I want to put him anywhere at all. So this doesn't mean I have to worry about compensation anymore. If the Giants need a DH, if the Mets need a DH, if there's another team out there that Willie Mays would look intriguing in as a DH versus left-handed pitching only in his final year of 73. Otherwise, we don't want the guy to struggle. We'll just probably let him retire. We did the same thing with Ernie Banks his last year. He had a card. We didn't play it. Sonny Sieverts had a great career for Boston and St. Louis, but they don't have any room because of Ken Forsch arriving and some other good, promising Cardinal pitchers in their farm system arising. So his Boston-St. Louis career is going to be ending. Twins, another Hall of Famer. We're seeing them. The inglorious ends of Killebrew and Willie Mays going on waivers. So, but it does mean that in a league full of designated hitters, all you need is to find a team who needs a DH versus lefties. That's like the least requirement you need. Don't even have to field. And we can find a spot for Killebrew or Mays in our league somewhere. Here's an interesting waiver. Kansas City could not find a taker for Kirkpatrick. And the reason was his ability to catch was in question. He was useful as a left-handed hitter who could catch, play some first base, and play some outfield, and even hit lefties a little bit, draw some walks, have some power. Checked all the boxes, but he's starting to check less boxes, and teams were skeptical of the versatility at this point of his career. So he'll be an attractive waivered player now, where all 32 teams can look at him and say, well, you know what, he's got just enough versatility to make our squad. And there's the Mets putting Duffy Dyer on waivers. And now we have the final bookkeeping. This is where all the league had 128 keepers. It's just a question of some teams had 3 waivered players or 3 retired players, and 1 waivered player and 1 retired player joining them. So this is about accounting purposes, teams making a deal. The teams who were at 403.01 making trades with teams who are at 401.03. And so we like to match up pitchers and hitters. Ultimately, these things don't even matter because the futures aren't going to be part of these franchises. But it's interesting to see the ends and careers of players. San Diego sends Bob Johnson from their bullpen to Houston for a retired player. Cleveland, Jack Brohammer, he's had a really difficult time in this. He was a keeper. Then he went on waivers. Then he got traded to Toronto, so for a retired player, Dan Monson. And Cleveland can go after Dwayne Kuiper as a left-handed second baseman if they want an improvement on Brohammer, so they don't need him anymore. And there's a swap of catchers between Baltimore and Pittsburgh. Chris Cannizzaro had and Hal King, really, neither had connections with their teams. So Cannizzaro has a little juice left, King does not. The yellow names, again, will be looked at by all the teams as on waivers. The red names, chances are their career is over or their performance is bad. Another catcher swap. Detroit sends John Stevenson to Boston for Dwayne Josephson. And a deal of Scandinavian players, I guess. Or whatever. Anyway, Yeah, Stevenson's got a little bit of life left there. Texas and the Mets. The Rangers send Mike Epstein, who still has a card. It's a very bad one in 73. They ship it off to the Mets on waivers for retired Joe Lovito, who actually was a Texas Ranger, retiring in Texas. And the White Sox, this is actually their own guy. They acquired him in the Louis Aparicio deal on waivers, and then they said, well, actually, we have to put him on retirement. We have too many waivered players, so they pushed Celerino Sanchez from waivers to retirement. What's interesting about this is that there is a card. So there will be a card on the in the retired list. Chances are it's going to be a pretty bad one, but we'll see it. We'll have a list of the Strat-O-Matic cards that exist on the retired list. It'll be a small list, like maybe between 5 and 10 players, Sanchez being one of them. And then Jim Howarth, same thing. His card exists, but it's a bad one. It'll be on the retirement list for the Giants. And that means that all the teams have comported. We'll go back to the main sheet here. All the teams have now comported to 4 guys they wish to keep. And the trade block guys, Daryl Thomas did get sent to Milwaukee. Siebert was on waivers. Bell or Woodson. Well, Bell and Woodson go on waivers. Osteen was dealt. He was dealt to the Yankees. Killebrew on waivers. Frank Robinson was dealt to Houston. Nelly Briles was safe. He stayed in Portland. He was on the trade block. Portland held on to him. Mike Torres was dealt to Oakland for Al Downing and Don Wilson. Good for the American League, I guess. Toy Cannon and Joe Ferguson traded teams. Houston and the Dodgers. Brohammer went on waivers. Pinson found a new team in Florida. Bob Oliver ended up in California. Ed Kirkpatrick, Roger Nelson. Kirkpatrick, you saw on waivers. Roger Nelson ended up in Portland. Bob Moose on waivers with Joe Coleman on waivers. Ramon Hernandez continued to do in the American League. He had real bad luck in Pittsburgh last few years, so we'll look for a fresh start with the Indians. Darwin, the Twins are glad to get their player back after a couple years in New York. Duffy Dyer on waivers. Burt Hooton, this could be an interesting move in the offseason. Cubs, just too many right-handed pitchers, had to let Hooton go. The Dodgers had no room for him either, so it was Toronto stepping in for Burt Hooton. Toronto is that smart team who makes deals when players are just sitting out there too long, and they spoke up and went after Burt Hooton. Beckert and Hickman on waivers. You see Carlos May was on the block, but the reality was his defense was poor. Batting average wasn't that great. His OPS is around 700 now. He really has only value to the White Sox, and frankly, you could swap Carlos May out for like a Pat Kelly. The White Sox really needed something like that. He's left-handed hitting corner outfielders are like a dime a dozen in this thing, and that's where Carlos May is presently. He's just kind of ordinary. The Giants did move Marshall. Hey, Juan Marichal got that final spot in the rotation because he actually is as good at or better than Tom Bradley, who ended up on Seattle. So Marichal will come back for one more year. Cincinnati stood pat, and then again at the very bottom, Oakland traded for Mike Torres. This is a strong 4 keepers for your Oakland A's. You got Rudy coming back, Hunter and Holtzman, and Torres will be a fine number 3 starter with his best year in 1976. So what they have to do now is they have to replace a lefty in Al Downing, and they could do it 2 different ways. They could find another lefty starter, or they could just go with a lefty reliever. That's a possibility. So if they want to carry 2 lefties in the bullpen instead of 2 lefties in the rotation. So that's it for the off-season looks. When we get together next time, we'll start looking at the individual lists of the carry-on guys each team has. We'll also look at the waiver list, the retirement list. These are from a year ago. And just take a peek at the stats and who looks like good options for that. That's it today. Thanks for checking out the off-season look, part 4, and we'll see you next week.